Imagine you're fighting a war. A world war, if you will. Deep in the tropical South Pacific. It's miserable, the heat is stifling, your ship is a giant sweatbox, and the rain just makes everything hotter. Japanese aircraft have been attacking you every single day for weeks, and they have started even flying into your ships in kamikaze attacks. Everything sucks, but then you get a big whopping bowl of ice cream. How good do you think that would have made you feel? How incredible would the relief of something that cold and so tasty be to your morale? Hell, at the end of the day at work, when I get ice cream, I get happy, so I can't even imagine this. Well, today we're going to talk about it, and the extreme lengths that the United States Navy went to ensure that every sailor was never too far from their ice cream. Welcome back to 5 Minute History, the weekly series where patrons choose the topic. This week we're going to be discussing ice cream barges in the Pacific, courtesy of Peter Lanskis. But why ice cream? See, the relationship between the US Navy and ice cream has roots stretching back to 1914, when the Secretary of the Navy, Josephus Daniels, issued the General Order of 99, prohibiting the consumption of alcohol aboard US vessels. The order was controversial to say the least, because from the start of the US Navy and all the way back into the Royal Navy, which is in many ways the US Navy's predecessor, sailors had long regarded having a tot of spirits or some beer as one of the best parts of their day. It was a basic comfort of naval life, and its removal annoyed the absolute hell out of all the sailors and even the officers, and it was extremely detrimental to morale. Especially when it came to the fact the Royal Navy was still happily handing out rum all the way up until the 1960s. For the American sailors who found themselves in ports with the British, which was a pretty common occurrence in this period, it was simply depressing. The Navy, to its credit, realised there was actually an issue here when it came to morale, and it needed a substitute to the alcohol. Something that could lift spirits without the moral implications of alcohol, because it's just not Christian. Yeah, I'm mocking Prohibition because it's dumb. Ice cream was a pretty obvious solution because it was already loved across American society. It was cheap to produce in bulk too, and it was the kind of thing that every single person could eat. You know, except for the people who are lactose intolerant, but I am yet to meet one that doesn't just say stuff it and down a litre of milk for the joy of milk yet. One big upside to ice cream was that nobody was ever going to be brought up on disciplinary action because they ate too much of it. The solution was seemingly found. It was simple, it worked, everyone got ice cream, everyone loved ice cream, and everything was good, right? Well, not really, because there were some pretty significant drawbacks. Either way, by the time the Second World War arrived, ice cream had been woven into the culture of the US Navy so thoroughly that ensuring sailors had access to it was considered a genuine logistical priority. This here, though, is where the issues that I have been alluding to sort of come to the forefront, and it's a pretty obvious one. Ice cream melts in hot weather. This bit of the world, this hot bit, it's not exactly known for conditions conducive to longevity in ice cream. See, the Second World War presented the US Navy with this problem and the issue of the fact that the peacetime fleet was basically a squadron when you compare it to the gigantic wartime fleet. Hundreds of thousands of men were deployed across the Pacific, operating from island bases, aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and more at enormous distances from the continental United States. Getting food to these men was difficult enough. Getting perishable comfort items such as fresh fruit, dairy, and on top of that frozen desserts, it was a brutally difficult task. The solution, in the case of ice cream, was the BRL, Barge Refrigerated Large, colloquially known as ice cream barges. These were large concrete vessels acquired from the US Army and converted into floating refrigerated warehouses, with an industrial ice cream production facility built into them. 3 were produced in total: USS Hydrogen, USS Calcium, and USS Antimony. I'm not entirely sure if they were commissioned into service or not. I've seen some conflicting sources, but they're either called Hydrogen, Calcium, and Antimony, or they've all got the USS prefix. Either way, great names for the ships. Today, though, these barges have been commonly referred to as ice cream ships specifically, but they weren't entirely ships. They were big floating warehouses on barges that made lots of ice cream and got towed around. Each barge measured 265 feet or 80.1 metres in length, 48 feet or 14.6 metres wide, and the concrete hulls were insulated with and fitted with diesel-driven generators that powered the refrigeration machinery, including 2 50-ton York ice machines. The holds could actually hold 1,500 tons of frozen meat and 500 tons of refrigerated vegetables, eggs, and dairy products, maintained at negative 9.4 degrees Celsius or 15 degrees Fahrenheit. At their core, though, was the ice cream facility, capable of producing 10 gallons every 7 minutes, or approximately 500 gallons per shift, the equivalent of 5 tons of ice cream per day. The barges could also store up to 4 shifts of production at any given time, meaning that if you came across one of these, odds were there was more ice cream than even a battleship crew could eat at any given time. Construction was completed by concrete ship constructors at National City, California, and the vessels were deployed to the Navy's Western Pacific area of operations. At one point, they were anchored with the massive fleet at the anchorage at Ulithi Atoll in the Caroline Islands. From there, ice cream was distributed to ships and shore installations across the theatre. A separate barge, BRL 3071, was later stationed at Buckner Bay in Okinawa, and it served as the refrigerated provision storage and distribution point in those final months of the Pacific War. See, the reason why the US was so willing to go out of its way, it's pretty obvious. It's also really sound. It's not just a case of we can, so we should do it. It's not an example of extreme power and ability. Rather, it's designed to make US forces happier, and happier soldiers, sailors, and airmen fight harder because they feel happier. It's why during the First World War, cooks were often given a special reverence. A good meal and some comfort can make all the difference. It's why First World War recipes actually taste really, really good. There's a fantastic Instagram creator, he also uses TikTok, I will link him in the description, but this is him here. He makes recipes from the British side in World War I. These recipes, they look simple, they look not the most appetizing, but I guarantee you they taste amazing. And it's the exact same reason, in the modern day, the United States can deploy a Burger King wherever it wants to, because it makes soldiers happy. And morale is everything. This isn't a modern occurrence either, because famously during the Age of Sail, it's common for captains to ensure their sailors had all been fed before battles to boost that morale. British tanks have tea makers in them for the exact same reason. The United States, it has ice cream. Sidebar, Ukrainian tankers use those British tea makers. They use them for soup, because they love soup. Particularly Bovril, apparently, but that's a whole other by the by. This kind of thinking was proven correct time and time again throughout the Pacific War. One major example is that when the USS Lexington, the aircraft carrier, was sunk during the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, one of the biggest stories from the disaster was not about the fighting or the fear of the sinking. Rather, it's the hours afterwards. See, as the crew are prepared to abandon ship, allegedly, Julius Frey, a common sailor in the US Navy, later recalled breaking into the ship's onboard snack bar with a fire axe and using his helmet to carry pineapple sherbet to shipmates waiting on deck, while other survivors broke in further and started scooping ice cream from the ship's freezers into their helmets as the vessel listed, and they were eating it on deck as they waited to evacuate. It was a boost in a dark time, up there with absolutely getting smashed while the Titanic was going down. After the war, the barges weren't needed anymore, and they quietly left service with the downsizing of the fleet, and like with a lot of the logistics of the war, they kind of fell by the wayside. Over time, the barges, through a gigantic game of telephone, became ships, then they would become a fleet of ships, and slowly the actual history of the barges would largely be forgotten, and the story would become one of those things you hear in a bar when someone hears you like history, walks up to you with a smug look and go, "Well, did you hear about this?" Yes, everyone knows that everyone liked ice cream in World War II. But that is the story of the ice cream barges. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, patrons, particularly the one who requested this topic, and I will catch you all next time.